My name is Bongani Ndlovu, Dr. Bongani Ndlovu. I am the Executive Director for Core Functions here at Iziko Museums of South Africa. My portfolio as the Executive Director in charge of core function is to have oversight over education programs, which includes outreach activities, public programs, and museum education programming. And then the other element is research and exhibition, to have oversight over that department, which broadly also include research that is done by social history curators, natural history curators, art curators, and also exhibitions that are developed by the museum through that particular department. And the last one, department that is in that portfolio, is collections and digitization. And that unit predominantly look at our collection management, conservation, restoration, digitization broadly. In essence, the core functions of a museum are the lifeblood of the museum, the heart of the museum. At first, when the president announced that the country was going to be placed under hard lockdown for about a few weeks, or 3 weeks, I think, initially, we were all hoping that at the end of those 3 weeks, the country was going to be ready to face the pandemic, and that all of us, health professionals, museum workers, and everybody in South Africa was going to be ready to cope with it. But as time passed by, we realized that it was not going to be like that. And we began then to think about alternative ways of doing museum. So in essence, my initial response, firstly, we were a little bit shocked, but also to realize that this was going to be our reality. The national state of disaster and the hard lockdown has not been easy to most of us as South Africans, and I assume also the heritage fraternity at large. So my view on how the lockdown affected the heritage sector and the arts in particular is that it halted one museum programming, and also the ways of doing museum. It affected museum programming in a sense that doing museum work is about interacting with the original. And when you do your research is around the archive, you interact with the archive, you interrogate the archive. If your research is around specimen, you also do laboratory work using the specimen, and along those lines, engaging the specimen, putting it under scrutiny, be it microscope and all other tools. The same thing applies to art. When you do and select artworks for exhibitions or research, you have also to interact with the real object. So that ritual of doing museum work had to be disrupted by the pandemic. We also undertook to do introduce new ways of doing museum, new ways of interacting with the archive remotely and virtually. But it took away that element of interrogating the original, the specimen, the artwork, the object, and it affected the way in which we do museum. Also, we have to think about doing more of our exhibitions online and virtually. And at first it caused a whole lot of tension behind the scene as to what are the tools that are needed by a museum staff working from home in order for him or her to be able to do that, to create a virtual exhibition. And what is it that was needed by a conventional museum to quickly migrate and use the tools, latest IT tools that will enable the museum to exhibit virtually. And museums also get their currency through the number of people who interact with their programming, with their public program events, with their exhibitions, and with the hard lockdown. We saw a decline in the number of people interacting with our content physically. And as we introduce other alternatives, as we introduce virtual exhibitions, we also have now to go into a space where we needed to also profile ourselves, publicize our activities. And during that period, almost everybody was moving or using online content, virtual content, and that space was also contested. There were those with financial muscles who could make their presence felt in that particular space. And the question around how did I find working from home? Well, it was a very difficult moment for us because working from home required that you also have enough tools of trade to interact with your colleagues and also to guide the process. Not only that, also to see to it that everybody that you are working with was in a sound mental state. Working in isolation also meant that you are deprived of an opportunity to brainstorm, have physical contact with your colleagues. And we had now to move to use virtual tools like Zoom, Teams, Google Meets, and also that required that those that you are interacting with, they need also to have data. They also need to have other tools that you'll be able to interact with them through, like laptops, like smartphones, and now we have also to navigate that. And coupled with that, there was also tensions that you have to navigate. But despite all those challenges, our teams were able to rise to the occasion, to overcome some of those challenges, and to stage wonderful and beautiful exhibitions, and to come up with beautiful online discussions, topics, and also to invite speakers who participated in our public programming events, in our education events. And also working from home, it also enabled some of our departments to plan and to think about the content that is required for the museum to be able to attract a new kind of audience, or a younger kind of audience, or else a combination, a mixed type of an audience. So it also gave us an opportunity to pause. During that period also, we were able to, as a team, to look at how we can reimagine museums post the introduction of Covid-19 and also during pandemics. So it's also enabled us to do that and to engage with that content in a manner that required us to do so. So we were doing museum from another angle, and it forced a space that is normally conservative and conventional to adopt new technologies and to adopt new ways of thinking. That's the beautiful thing, perhaps, and take from COVID-19. But at the same time also, working from home, we are also interacting with colleagues who were affected by the pandemic. Some of our colleagues were also infected by the pandemic. So it was also a space that was difficult to navigate. We were not able to mourn together, to cry together, and to support each other. My views on the vaccine is that, as Health Minister puts it, it will allow the country and South Africa and South Africans as a whole an opportunity at least to go back to their kind of normal, to be able also, it will enable us also to control the pandemic. It does not give or will not make us immune to it, but at least it will enable, if a point of what is referred to as herd immunity is reached, it will enable a number of individuals in our country to be at least protected. Human beings have been living with viruses throughout history. We've seen them, we've seen the human race navigating viruses 100 years ago, pandemics 100 years ago, navigating the Spanish flu, and throughout human history, at least post the introduction of modern medicine, human beings were introduced therefore to vaccines and to the art of being, and to the practice of being vaccinated. And we hope with the vaccination process, the country will be able to control this pandemic, and we will begin to see museums also going back to closely interrogating the original. But however, with that, having said that, we also see museums also actively incorporating the ideas that they've learned during the hard lockdown, and how therefore to monitor spaces remotely, how to use latest technology to do museum programming, how to use latest technology to meet. And there's basically no need for us to be flying around the world. Now we know that we can conference via virtual platforms. We know that we can now interact with colleagues elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in the world using virtual platforms. For another take or another idea or things that we've learned from the COVID-19 pandemic is that there is opportunity for growth, opportunity to embrace new ways of doing